The celestial voyager drifted through the stars with a grace that bordered on arrogance. Every surface polished to a mirror sheen, every corridor humming with a perfection that whispered of Australan superiority. Its vaulted lounge, framed by a viewport that stretched the length of the deck, was awash in pale golden light that dimmed just enough to flatter the jeweled garments of its most distinguished passengers. Laughter, refined and practiced, floated like music over the clink of crystalline glasses and the soft notes of the string ensemble hidden within the alcoves. Max Reeves sat at the far end of the polished bar, a tall glass of something iridescent and alien swirling in his hand, its shifting colors catching the reflection of the 3 small suns beyond the viewport. He looked like he belonged there, broad shoulders filling out a well-tailored navy shirt. Hair cut to military precision, with just enough gray at the temples to command respect. But even as he leaned with casual ease against the bar, his eyes betrayed him. They weren't the eyes of a man content to be idle. They were the eyes of someone measuring angles, distances, exits, watching the room with the quiet vigilance of habit. Retirement might have taken him out of the cockpit, but it had not stripped away the instincts of a man who had survived many missions by refusing to relax completely. The bartender, a 4-armed Australan with copper-hued skin that gleamed like burnished metal, slid another drink across the counter and asked with polite curiosity if it was Max's first time aboard an Australan vessel. Max chuckled, voice low and smooth, admitting that perhaps he stood out more than he realized. Most humans keep to their own ships, the bartender observed, his tone free of judgment, but edged with the faint superiority all Australan carried like perfume. Max raised his glass, the faintest of smiles, touching his lips as he replied, "Always preferred the road less traveled." It was then, as if fate had chosen the moment to test his words, that a melodic voice brushed against his ears, drawing him from the quiet rhythm of the lounge. He turned and found himself staring into eyes the color of sea glass, catching sunlight, eyes set in a face of smooth turquoise skin, flecked with silver that shimmered whenever she moved. Her long hair, white and pale blue strands entwined, cascaded like water over her shoulders, and her emerald garment clung to her, in a way that was both regal and undeniably human in its suggestion of curves. Nerra Thelasi introduced herself with the poise of a scholar, but the curiosity of a child seeing something rare, sliding onto the stool beside him and ordering a drink that glowed like liquid moonlight. She studied him openly, unbothered by the etiquette that restrained others. Anthropological researcher, she explained when he raised a brow at her interest. I study interspecies cultural exchange. And right now, yes, I suppose I am studying you. Max smirked faintly, lifting his glass as if to toast the idea. Humans fascinate you? He asked. Her lips curved, fuller than a human's and tinted blue, giving the impression of a smile sculpted for secrets. Your kind adapts, she said. Where others falter, you persist. Some call it recklessness. I think it is more. Max's gaze held hers, appreciating both the compliment and the hint of challenge behind it. He found himself enjoying the conversation, a rare thing for a man who often preferred silence to small talk. For the first time since boarding, he felt the faint stirrings of interest in more than just surviving the voyage. The moment held a promise of something unexpected, a thread he might choose to follow, but the ship itself had other plans. Without warning, the celestial voyager shuddered with a violence that sent glasses toppling and patrons clutching at the bar. Max's drink sloshed over his hand as the lights flickered, dimming to half their brilliance before stabilizing. Across the lounge, whispers rose in pitch, refined laughter collapsing into nervous speculation. The crew rushed to reassure passengers, their perfect composure cracking at the edges. Max felt it immediately, the subtle wrongness in the way the ship listed. the heavy struggle in its stabilizers that no luxury design could fully hide. He didn't need a console to tell him what his bones already knew. Something was failing, and failing badly. Nera caught his glance, her own eyes wide with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Alarms began to pulse, a soft amber glow along the floor that belied the sharp undertone of danger. The elegant veneer of Australan supremacy thinned in an instant, replaced with the primal truth of all spacefaring vessels. When the stars grow hostile, survival depends not on wealth or status, but on instinct. And Max Reeves, who had promised himself he was only a passenger, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline flare to life in his veins. The universe had once again thrown him into the role he had tried to leave behind. And as the lounge dissolved into uneasy chaos, he knew he could not simply sit and watch. The celestial voyager groaned like a wounded beast as another tremor rolled through its vast frame. Chandeliers swaying in the lounge while alien passengers clutched at tables with jeweled hands that had likely never known fear. Max Reeves was already on his feet, his glass abandoned on the bar, his gaze fixed on the viewport, where swirls of purple and blue light churned into a violent storm outside. At first glance it might have looked beautiful, a nebula painted across the void, but Max knew better. He could see the jagged pulses in the cloud's heart, the way energy flared in chaotic bursts. Electromagnetic storm, he thought grimly. The worst kind for a ship like this, too advanced, too dependent on precision systems that didn't know how to improvise. Beside him, Nera steadied herself, one hand gripping the bar, the other pressed lightly to his arm, as though drawn there by instinct. Her voice was calm, but he heard the tremor beneath it when she asked what was happening. "Systems are failing in sequence," Max replied without hesitation. "Navigation first, now stabilizers. Communications will go next. Classic M cascade." She blinked at him, the silver flecks in her turquoise skin catching the emergency lights. "How can you possibly know that?" Max didn't answer. He was already moving, cutting through the crowd as passengers began to panic. Their cries rising like static dot the corridor outside the lounge, pitched violently, forcing crew and civilians alike to grab the walls. The elegant Australan attendants, who had only hours ago glided through the ship with effortless composure, now shouted contradictory orders, their voices betraying the fear they tried to suppress. Nera hurried after Max, her emerald garment brushing against his arm as the amber floor lights pulsed like a heartbeat. "You're a passenger," she insisted, trying to match his stride. "They won't let you near the bridge." Max shot her a grim smile. "They won't have a choice." Another jolt slammed through the vessel, throwing two attendants into a decorative fountain, where the water now sloshed sideways against the glass walls. Max caught Nera before she could stumble, his palm firm against the small of her back. For a heartbeat they locked eyes, the noise of chaos fading as something unspoken flickered between them. She thanked him softly, voice low enough to be lost to everyone but him. He nodded once, the moment shattering when a klaxon screamed overhead. Together they pressed on, weaving through the tide of frightened passengers. At the doors to the bridge, two Australan security officers stood rigid despite the ship's lurching, their ceremonial blue uniforms immaculate even under the emergency lighting. Their orders were clear: no civilians allowed. Max stepped forward anyway, introducing himself not as a tourist, but as a former IDF combat pilot. His voice was steady, authoritative, carrying the cadence of someone who had once given orders that meant life or death. "Your ship is in an electromagnetic storm," he said, "and your systems are too precise to survive it. I can help." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. They were trained to obey protocol, but protocol had not prepared them for a human with eyes that carried the weight of battle. One officer slipped inside, the door hissing shut, leaving Max and Nera waiting in tense silence. She leaned closer, her whisper urgent. "If you're wrong, I'm not," he interrupted, his jaw tightening as the deck pitched again beneath their feet. When the door slid open, the bridge lay in chaos. Displays sputtered with static, alarms shrieked, and officers scrambled across the polished deck, their usual elegance shattered by fear. At the center stood Captain Eldon, tall and aristocratic, his face set in a mask of control that fooled no one. He turned sharply when the guard announced Max's presence. "Highly irregular," he snapped. A desperation edged his words. "My first officer says you're qualified." "What do you suggest, human?" Max's eyes went to the navigation console, where two pilots struggled against controls that refused to obey. Their movements were frantic, precise, but doomed. "Disengage the automatic protocols," Max said firmly. "Switch to manual." Gasps rippled through the crew, horror flashing across the female pilot's pale blue face. "No one flies Australan ships manually," she protested. Another jolt slammed the deck, throwing half the officers to the floor. A warning flared red across the main screen. Hull integrity at 70%. Max stepped forward, voice iron. "Your systems can't read this storm." "I can. Let me fly your ship." For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the groan of the vessel straining against the storm. The captain's jaw worked, his pride at war with the truth staring him in the face. At last he nodded sharply. "Do it." The pilots hesitated, then moved aside. The console shifted, rearranging itself into a simpler form at a rapid sequence of commands. Max slid into the chair, his hands finding the controls as if they had been waiting for him. "I need to feel her," he murmured, fingers tightening as the ship bucked like a living creature. "Nera," he called over his shoulder without looking, "watch the energy readings. Tell me when they spike." She moved to his side without question, her presence steady, her sea-green eyes fixed on the storm data even as fear rippled through the bridge. The ship tilted violently, but Max adjusted, guiding it like a surfer finding balance on a wave no one else could see. The crew watched in breathless silence, and as the vessel plunged deeper into the storm, the Australan pilots gasped, not at the storm, but at the human who flew their pride with instinctive grace no machine could replicate. The Celestial. Voyager broke through the storm, battered but alive. Her hull scorched and her elegant systems sputtering like the labored breath of a prize thoroughbred pushed beyond its limit. Relief surged through the bridge as lights steadied and alarms dimmed, but Max Reeves did not relax. His hands lingered on the controls, feeling the residual tremors in the ship's frame, listening with the intimacy of a man who had lived more hours in cockpits than in bedrooms. "We're not out of this yet," he said quietly, rising from the chair. Captain Eldon's pride was a fragile mask stretched tight across his aristocratic face as he acknowledged, in clipped tones, that the ship had suffered catastrophic damage. "Primary propulsion is offline. Secondary systems at 30%. His words cracked the illusion of invulnerability, and the truth settled over the crew like a shroud. The Celestial Voyager could not continue in open space. "Then we land," Max said simply, as though the decision had already been made. The bridge erupted with protests, Australan voices raised in outrage that anyone would suggest sullying their grand liner with the dirt of an alien world. "This vessel is not designed for planetary descent," Eldon barked, his composure fraying. Max's voice cut through theirs with the cold clarity of experience. "It's either a controlled landing or an uncontrolled crash. Your choice." For a long taut silence, no one moved. Then, reluctantly, the captain gave the order. The ship descended toward Terrafex 4, her vast bulk groaning as atmosphere gripped her. Max stood shoulder to shoulder with Lieutenant Pox, the female pilot whose earlier scorn had been replaced with a taut respect. Together they managed the angle of entry, fighting turbulence and heat as fire licked across the viewports. "Trajectory stable," Nera called from the secondary console, her calm tone masking the awe in her eyes as she watched Max coax the wounded giant through descent. The plateau rose ahead, a broad scar of flatland framed by purple forests that shimmered under the light of twin suns. The impact rattled bones, the scream of metal deafening as the celestial Voyager skidded across alien soil, carving a furrow that spewed dirt and smoke until, with a final jarring lurch, the ship ground to a halt. For a moment, silence reigned, a silence filled with disbelief that they were still breathing. Max released the controls, his knuckles white, his body thrumming with the adrenaline of survival. "Welcome to Terrafex 4, he muttered, though there was no triumph in his voice, only grim acknowledgement of the trials still ahead. Within hours, a survey team was assembled. Captain Eldon, still stiff with the humiliation of needing a human's hand to save his ship, grudgingly allowed Max to accompany them, his authority undermined by the crew's whispers and the way their eyes kept flicking toward the human with something like reverence. Nera insisted on joining, her status as an anthropologist giving her the excuse, though Max sensed she had other reasons. Alongside Lieutenant Pox and 2 wary security officers, they descended the ramp into the alien air. It was breathable, tinged with a sharp scent like cinnamon tangled with ozone, a perfume that clung to the lungs. The ground beneath their boots was firm, the plateau stretching into endless vistas of jagged stone and violet vegetation that swayed as if moved by unseen tides. For a brief moment, Max marveled. After decades of flying, after countless planets glimpsed only from orbit or through cockpit windows, he was walking into the unknown with nothing between him and the horizon. The moment shattered when a horn-like call echoed across the plateau. Figures emerged from the tree-lined humanoid, but with gray-green skin, crested skulls adorned with woven patterns, and eyes that glittered like polished obsidian. They carried spears tipped with some crystalline alloy, their stances wary but strong. The Australan officers stiffened, hands twitching toward weapons, but the natives ignored them. Their gaze locked instead on Max. Murmurs rippled through the group, confusion etched across faces that moments ago had carried hostility. One figure stepped forward, draped in more intricate garb, clearly a leader. His voice rang out, sharp and resonant, though the meaning was lost until Lieutenant Pax's translator device crackled to life. The Sky People returned. It rendered in halting common, "But you are different." Spears that had been raised toward the Australan lowered fractionally, redirected toward their blue-skinned companions with visible disdain. The leader pointed at Max, his tone shifting to reverence. "You may speak." Nera moved closer to Max, her shoulder brushing his, her whisper urgent. "They recognize Australans, and they hate them, but they've never seen a human before." Max swallowed, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes on him. "We had to land here for repairs," he said slowly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We mean no harm." The translation rolled out, met with murmurs, heads nodding, spears lowering further. The leader introduced himself as Krell, his name carrying the weight of command, and gestured for them to follow. Max glanced at Eldon's stiff form, then at Nera's sea-green eyes shining with curiosity. He realized, with a sinking certainty, that his role as just a passenger had ended the moment he touched the controls. Now to these people, he was something more, and whatever they believed him to be. It was a role he could not easily refuse. The trek through the violet forest was unlike any march Max Reeves had ever endured in his years of military service. Not for its hardship, but for the strange weight of history pressing in from all sides. The air carried a resinous sweetness, like pine laced with cinnamon, and shafts of amber light from the twin suns pierced the canopy, illuminating dust motes that seemed to shimmer with their own faint glow. Krell led the way with surprising agility for his age, his crest of bone and woven ornaments swaying as he moved, his stride steady on paths known only to his people. Nera walked at Max's side, her eyes wide as she studied carvings etched into the trunks of massive trees and the patterns of woven talismans that hung from branches like silent sentinels. "This isn't decoration," she murmured, fingers brushing a carving that depicted figures descending from the sky. "It's history recorded in a living archive." Max followed her gaze and froze, his pulse quickening. The figures carved into the bark were unmistakably human. The natives walked with reverence, murmuring to one another whenever Max passed, as though his very presence confirmed stories told across countless generations. By dusk, they emerged onto a ridge, and the sight that spread before them stole the breath from every throat. Rising from the valley floor stood the Temple of Stars, a pyramid of gleaming black stone, its surface etched with shifting geometric patterns that caught the last light of day and sent it dancing across the plain. Smaller structures surrounded it, half swallowed by vegetation, but the pyramid itself remained untouched by time, its angles sharp, its face gleaming as though newly forged. Krell's voice was thick with pride as he gestured toward it. "The place where the guides descended. Only those of their blood may enter." His words made Max's skin prickle. He felt the stellarite crystal in his pocket begin to pulse with heat, a steady rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. Nera turned to him, her sea-green eyes shining with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "It's responding to you," she whispered. At the pyramid's base, an entrance waited, a tall hexagonal doorway carved with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly as Max approached. He reached out, his fingers brushing a shape that looked impossibly like Sanskrit. At his touch, the stellarite flared, casting a halo of blue light across his face. The symbols along the doorway ignited, glowing in sequence until a low hum vibrated through the valley. With the sound of a long exhalation, the massive stone slid aside, revealing a corridor that plunged into darkness. Krell bowed his head, his voice reverent. "The guides have returned." Max felt the weight of Nera's hand slip into his, steady and warm. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. He squeezed her fingers, drawing strength from the steadiness in her voice, and stepped forward. Inside, the corridor lit as they advanced, strips of pale blue light blooming awake along the smooth walls. The air was cool, dry, carrying none of the mustiness of a tomb, but the sterile bite of technology preserved. The stellarite around Max's neck burned brighter, a pulse that seemed to echo through the structure itself. They descended deeper until the passage opened into a vast chamber that made even Nera gasp aloud. A central platform rose like an altar, ringed with consoles and dormant holographic projectors, while the walls were lined with sealed units. Some marked with symbols Max recognized in fragments, schematics, star charts, a language both alien and eerily familiar. He stepped onto the platform, and the entire chamber awoke. Holographic constellations burst into life overhead, filling the space with stars and glowing lines of navigation. A voice, ancient and resonant, spoke in heavily accented English that made Max's skin crawl with recognition. Genetic profile recognized. Descendant of Earth Expedition Vanguard. Access granted. Max staggered, his breath caught in his throat. Earth Expedition 15,000 years ago? The voice continued, coldly factual. This is the final command center of the Human Stellar Alliance. Established during the Cataclysm War. Emergency Protocol Omega enacted. Off-world populations returned to Earth. Advanced technology dismantled. Earth quarantined until humanity could rebuild. Nera's hand clutched his arm, her eyes wide with shock. Max, this isn't mythology. It's history. Your people ruled the stars before the Australan even had fire. The stellarite in his palm pulsed in affirmation, flooding him with warmth, with fragments of knowledge that felt both alien and deeply his own. Pride warred with sorrow in his chest. His ancestors had touched the stars, only to fall, and now their legacy stirred within him. He turned slowly to face Krell and Nera, the holographic constellations glimmering in his eyes. "I'm not just a passenger," he whispered. "I'm their blood, and the stars just remembered me." As the chamber thrummed with awakening power, distant signals flickered across the display's alerts of stellarite-powered ships in orbit, one marked with the insignia of the Confederacy, another unmarked, but bristling with extraction codes. Nera's voice trembled with urgency. "The mining guild is here." Max closed his fist around the glowing crystal, his jaw hardening. The past had awakened, and with it, responsibility. He was no longer a man trying to enjoy retirement. He was the descendant of a forgotten empire, standing at the threshold of a war that had been buried for 15,000 years. And the galaxy was about to remember it too. The village at the edge of the purple forest burned with chaos when Max, Reeves, and Nera returned from the Temple of Stars, the stellarite pendant at his neck glowing like a living heartbeat. Natives screamed as mining guild enforcers hulking Dravex, mercenaries clad in armor that shimmered with stolen energy fields, marched through the settlement, herding families into tight clusters, while others tore through huts in search of crystals. The air reeked of ozone and scorched earth, and the thud of armored boots over stone drowned out the desperate cries of the innocent. Captain Eldon and his Australan officers stood nearby, stripped of their authority by the presence of a towering Dravex commander whose jagged scales gleamed gold in the twin suns. His voice cut the air like steel. "This settlement and its resources are guild property under Confederacy sanction. Interference will be punished as treason." Eldon blustered, invoking treaties and protocol, but the Dravex sneered, dismissing him with the ease of a predator discarding prey. Nera's hand tightened around Max's arm. "They'll destroy everything. The Confederacy won't stop them. Max, it has to be you." Max scanned the scene with the practiced calm of a soldier. 20 Dravex enforcers armed with stellarite-powered rifles, 2 heavy transports with mounted cannons, and frightened villagers corralled like cattle. His instincts calculated odds, angles, and consequences. His heart, however, burned with the memory of the holographic voice in the temple, of ancestors who had once protected the helpless with fire and steel. He reached into his pack, drawing forth one of the ancient human Stellar Alliance weapons retrieved from the command center. It hummed to life in his grip, a low thrumming that vibrated in his bones, harmonizing with the pulse of the stellarite at his chest. The blue glow of his eyes caught the attention of the natives first, then the Australian crew, and finally the Dravex commander, who turned with a mocking laugh. "Another human interloper," he spat, his words thick with disdain. "Stand down, or I'll break you before these primitives to show them the price of defiance." Max stepped forward, his voice carrying across the plaza with a calm authority that silenced the crowd. "That's enough. This planet is under the protection of the Human Stellar Alliance." Gasps rippled from Australan throats, disbelief etched into every aristocratic feature. Eldon's eyes widened in shock, his composure shattered as he recognized the words not as bluster, but as declaration backed by the unmistakable hum of technology that should not exist. The Dravex commander scoffed and gestured. 2 enforcers raised their weapons and fired, bolts of searing energy cutting through the air. Max's ancient rifle sang with a resonant pulse, releasing twin arcs of force that neutralized the blasts. Midder and sent the mercenaries sprawling, their armor sparking uselessly. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of the Dravex commander's breath. "Impossible," he growled, but Max was already advancing, each step measured, the glow at his throat brightening until it bathed the plaza in an otherworldly light. Above, the celestial Voyager responded. Systems hidden for centuries reawakened, weapon panels sliding open with mechanical precision, their targeting arrays locking on the mining guild ship in orbit. Simultaneously, a deep tremor rolled through the ground as the Temple of Stars broadcast its reactivation pulse, enslaving every Stellarite-based device within range. The mercenaries' rifles flickered, went dark, and fell silent in their hands. Panic rippled through the guild ranks as weapons failed, drones collapsed mid-flight, and armor dimmed to inert metal. The villagers straightened, no longer captives, but witnesses to history unfolding. Nera moved to stand at Max's side, her voice clear and fierce as she addressed both Astralan and Dravix. The Confederacy's lies end here. The Stellarite belongs to the people of Terrafex 4, as it always has. And humanity forgotten by your records was here before you, sworn to protect. Her words struck like thunder, amplified by the presence of Max himself, his body alight with the legacy of the human-stellar alliance. The Dravix commander snarled, scales rippling with rage, but his communicator crackled with frantic voices. The guild vessel overhead had gone dark, its engines paralyzed by the pulse from the temple. He hesitated, uncertainty breaking through arrogance. Max leveled his weapon, the hum resonating like a warning bell. "Leave now," he ordered, his tone as final as a blade drawn across the neck. "Or I'll show you what happens when humanity remembers its place among the stars." The silence stretched until the commander raised his clawed hand, signaling retreat. Grumbling and snarling, the Dravix enforcers pulled back, dragging their unconscious comrades and boarding their transports. Engines roared, dust filled the air, and in moments the guild force was gone, their humiliation carved into memory. The village erupted in cries of triumph, elders kneeling before Max with tears in their obsidian eyes. Krell raised his spear high, declaring in his native tongue that the guides had returned, and for the first time the Astralan pilots who had once dismissed him gasped, not in disbelief, but in reverence. Captain Eldon approached cautiously, pride gone, voice subdued. "Mr. Reeves, Max, you've done what we could not. What you've revealed here, what you've awakened, changes everything." Max looked to Nera, her gaze steady, her silver-flecked skin glowing in the Stellarite's light. He realized then that this was no longer about survival, nor even about a single planet. The stars themselves had shifted, and he, once only a passenger, now stood as the living link between a forgotten empire and the galaxy that had stolen its legacy. And in the silence that followed the Dravix retreat, Max felt the full weight of destiny settle on his shoulders, a weight he was no longer willing to shrug aside. Twilight bled across. Terrafex 4 in colors no human painter could capture magenta. Flames streaked with amber, twin suns sinking behind the violet forest. The celestial Voyager sat scarred but upright on the plateau, her hull still dotted with repair drones that skittered like silver insects, patching wounds left by the storm. In the village below, fires burned not with destruction but celebration, their smoke curling into the sky as drums beat a slow rhythm of triumph. Max Reeves stood at the center of the plaza, the Stellarite pendant at his chest glowing faintly, its light echoing the pride and fear mingled in his heart. Krell, the native leader, had spoken before the gathered people, calling Max the return of the guides, a promise fulfilled across millennia. Yet Max felt no godhood in himself, only the weight of revelation pressing down like the storm he had flown them through. He was not simply a passenger. He was heir to a legacy older than most species alive, a legacy the galaxy had forgotten and perhaps feared. Captain Eldon stepped forward, his posture stripped of arrogance. His eyes, once so full of icy dismissal, now carried respect tinged with unease. "Mr. Reeves," he said, voice pitched low enough to carry to Max alone, "what you've awakened here will ripple across the Confederacy. The guild will not forgive this humiliation, and the council will not welcome the return of an ancient power beyond their control. Max's gaze shifted to the villagers, to the children who danced beneath banners painted with crude likenesses of him already taking shape. Then they'll have to learn, he replied. This planet isn't a resource to strip, and humans aren't the reckless novices they thought we were. History has a longer memory than lies. Nera joined him, her turquoise skin luminous in the firelight, her sea-green eyes fierce with conviction. And truth spreads, she added softly, no matter how many try to bury it. I'll ensure it does. Every scholar, every council chamber will know what we found. Her hand brushed his, and Max felt the promise in her touch, not just partnership, but defiance, a vow to carry the truth together. Later, as the celebration quieted, Max stood on a ridge overlooking the plateau, the repaired Voyager gleaming faintly under starlight. Nera joined him, slipping easily into the space beside him, her presence steady and grounding. You've changed them, she said, nodding toward the Australan crew, who now mingled awkwardly but peacefully with the villagers. Even Eldon. They looked at you with fear before. Now they see possibility. Max chuckled softly, though there was no humor in his eyes. I'm not sure which is more dangerous. He lifted the pendant, watching its glow pulse like a living heart. The temple isn't just awake. It's broadcasting. Other outposts will hear the signal. If there really were human Stellar Alliance colonies scattered across the stars. His words trailed off, but Nera finished them for him. Then humanity's return is inevitable. She tilted her head, her hair catching silver in the starlight. Does that frighten you? Max let out a long breath. It should. But instead, it feels like coming home. The night ended, but the dawn that followed was anything but ordinary. As the twin suns rose, the stellarite pulsed brighter, and across the horizon, faint streaks of light carved the sky beacons answering the temple's call. Some were distant, little more than whispers at the edge of sight, but others burned close, undeniable. Nera gasped softly, gripping his arm. Other outposts, she whispered. They're waking. Eldon and his officers stumbled onto the ridge behind them, faces pale as they too saw the sky live with human fire reborn. Krell fell to his knees in the plaza below, arms raised, his voice carrying in reverent chants. Max felt his pulse sink with the glow of the pendant, his chest heavy with awe and resolve. The galaxy would not remain as it was. The Australan Confederacy, the Mining Guild, every power that thought humanity a minor player in the cosmic game, they would now reckon with the truth. Humanity had ruled once. Humanity would rise again. Nera slipped her fingers through his, her voice a whisper meant for him alone. So, descendant of a forgotten empire, where will you go first? Max turned toward her, the weight of the sky reflected in his eyes, but also something lighter, warmer, anchored in her presence. Wherever the fight for truth takes me, he said. Then, with a small smile that belonged not to the soldier or the heir of an empire, but to the man she had met over alien cocktails, he added, and wherever you are. Their lips met in a kiss as the suns climbed higher, witnessed by villagers who believed prophecy fulfilled, by Australan pilots who finally understood why they had gasped at the human, and by the awakening outposts that pulsed across the heavens like the heartbeat of a reborn alliance. Max Reeves had boarded as just a passenger. Now he stood as the spark of humanity's return, the echo of ancient power roaring back into a galaxy that would never see humans the same way again. 3 months later, the celestial Voyager glided into Australan Central Port, her hull whole again, but bearing the subtle scars of what she had endured on Terrafex 4. The docks bustled with diplomats, traders, and curious onlookers, their voices rising in a chorus that filled the vast concourse. But Max Reeves felt the weight of every step as he descended the gangway. He wasn't just a passenger returning from an ill-fated cruise. He was the man who had forced the galaxy to confront a history it had chosen to forget. Reporters shouted questions in half a dozen languages. Flashes from holocams painted the air in bursts of light, but Max barely heard them. The stellarite pendant pulsed softly against his chest, hidden beneath his shirt, yet impossible to ignore, as though reminding him that his life no longer belonged to anonymity. Nera walked at his side, her turquoise skin shimmering under the station's bright lamps, her expression composed, but her sea-green eyes alight with fire. Scholars already whispered her name across academic circles. The lassie, the anthropologist who had uncovered proof of the human-stellar alliance. Together they looked like symbols, unwillingly sculpted by circumstance into figures larger than themselves. Inside the station, the council had prepared a formal reception. Australan banners unfurled from the vaulted ceiling, but they could not mask the tension that thrummed beneath the polished marble floor. Captain Eldon stood stiffly before the assembly, his voice recounting the official report of Terrafex 4, the storm, the forced landing, the mining guild's unlawful incursion, and the unexpected intervention of the human passenger. His words were carefully chosen, but Max noted how often the captain's gaze strayed to him, lingering as though caught between resentment and respect. When Eldon finished, murmurs rippled through the chamber, counselors leaning toward one another, their faces pale with unease. Max felt Nera's hand brush his arm, a grounding gesture, before he stepped forward. He had no speech prepared, only truth. "I didn't plan this," he began, his voice steady though every alien eye burned into him. "I bought a ticket. I wanted to drink, sleep, and maybe remember what it felt like to live without duty. But the storm didn't care that I was retired, and neither did the people of Terrafex 4 when the guild came for them. I flew because I had to. I stood because I couldn't walk away. And when the Temple of Stars opened for me, it wasn't destiny, it was a reminder. Humanity belonged to the stars long before your records ever mentioned us. We fell, yes, but we never stopped looking up." He drew the stellarite pendant from his shirt, its blue glow spilling across the chamber like liquid fire. Gasps erupted, not only from the council, but from the assembled Australan pilots who recognized the impossible resonance of technology answering to him alone. "The alliance you never knew still lingers in us," Max said, his voice sharper now. "And it's waking. I'm proof of that. This galaxy isn't yours alone to rule or exploit. We're part of it, and we're done being overlooked." For a moment, silence blanketed the hall, broken only by the faint hum of the pendant. Then voices rose, some in outrage, others in awe. One counselor declared him dangerous, another insisted on partnership, and others whispered of rebellion against centuries of Australan revisionism. Nera stepped to his side, her voice cutting through the clamor with a scholar's clarity. "I documented everything," she announced, holding up a data crystal. "The carvings, the outpost, the mining guild's crimes. The truth is recorded. You can suppress a man, but not history." Her words struck like a blade, and Max felt pride swell in his chest as he looked at her, not just as an ally, but as the bridge he could never be alone. Later, as the noise of politics echoed behind them, Max and Nera stood on the observation deck, overlooking Earth's distant trade lane. Plans were already forming, delegations to Terrafex 4, treaties to redraw, guild leaders to challenge. But for now, the moment was theirs. "So what now?" Nera asked quietly, her fingers sliding into his. Max exhaled, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. "Now we go home. Earth needs to know. They need to understand who they really are, who they were." His smile was faint, tinged with weariness and wonder. "I thought I was done with flying. Turns out I was just waiting for the right course." Nera leaned into him, her hair brushing his shoulder, her voice soft with conviction. "Then let's set it together. The galaxy won't be ready, but we will." Beyond the viewport, faint beacons flared across the sector, the signatures of other Stellarite outposts responding to the temple's call. Some burned like distant stars. Others glowed with steady, patient light, all waiting to be found. The human-stellar alliance, long buried in myth, was stirring across the void. And as Max Reeves stood with Nera Thelassi, hand in hand, he realized the greatest journey of his life wasn't behind him. It was about to begin.